Hello. Well, we hear lots of talk in industry about becoming data-driven and creating business value from data. And at a high level, there's, of course, consensus that there are multiple ways to do this, right? We can monetize data. We can use data to power analytics that helps us optimize pricing or costs or minimize fraud, all of those things. But practical advice about how to actually tackle the journey is not so easy to come by. So for this video, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by two prominent data analytics leaders from industry who've got some really good insights to share. Welcome, Viktorija Diestelkamp and Brendan Ellis. Let's start with you, Viktorija. Could you just take a moment to introduce yourself, and then we'll come to you, Brendan.
Of course. Thank you for having me, Neil. So my name is Viktorija. I'm a senior manager of business intelligence for Virgin Atlantic. So I'm really spending most of my time looking at a long-term strategy for my organization. And I am also a chief digital officer for a nonprofit organization. So a very mixed bag of skills, I would say.
Fantastic. Thanks, Viktorija. And thank you for taking the time to chat to us today. Brendan, over to you.
Good morning, Neil. Thank you for having me as well. So, Brendan Ellis, head of data and BI for Pantheon Ventures, which is a private equity company in the private market space. So, I'm an accountant by trade, although very much moved into the data space. And really, my role revolves around setting the vision and strategy for data and trying to bring the firm on that data journey, which I'm sure will be a topic of discussion in a moment. But yeah, very much kind of helping people understand the power of data and hopefully making more data-enabled decisions is really the key aim.
Brilliant. Yeah, well, it's brilliant to have you here, both on the chat today. And as I said, we see so much discussion, don't we, about how organizations could get value. And I know that there's so much, from talking to you previously, I know there's so much we can potentially talk about, much more than we can cover in this one video today. So maybe we'll come back to the other topics later. But let's just start here at the beginning, which of course is the best place to start. In your experience, what's the best way to identify and then scope projects that will really add value? And I guess particularly at the start of a journey where maybe there's no proof points and we just need to start. We need to start somewhere and start making an impact. So I know one point of view that's common is that we should be looking for and developing bite-sized projects. And I don't know, Viktorija or Brendan, who wants to go first, but let's one of you start off by talking about how you see the value and maybe also the compromises we make by taking this kind of approach. Who wants to go first?
Well, I'd say, shall I kick off, Viktorija? Because I know that with the previous conversations, we've both come at it from slightly different answers. So I think it could be quite an interesting one. I think.
Yeah, of course. Go ahead.
Initially, it was about creating maybe smaller, more incremental endeavors that really tackled some business problems to try and get a win on the board. I think we certainly in the data space, we could be guilty of trying to wanting to boil the ocean and change the world. But actually, businesses often aren't quite as ready for that big change. And so really, is the answer trying to break it down into a smallest possible chunk to deliver something as quickly as possible to see if it works? Now, that would rely on being able to determine what the key question is that we're trying to answer. And that's often a real business challenge. But if you can really define a challenge or a problem that the business has, and what I call the exam question, if you define that and break it to the smallest possible chunk, does that allow us to then generate a bit of value that we can lean on? It's certainly something that I've battled with, but I think, Viktorija, I know what you're going to say, but what's your view?
I think for me, it's really going back to basics, where proof of concept or a smaller size project would only tell you whether you can or cannot build something. It's very limited in scope when you break it down into small pieces. Now, it's not going to tell you whether we should. And I think when we talk about the value, BI's been around since 1860s or something, AI since 50s. So it's not something new. It's not something we haven't seen before. And I think everyone's fairly aligned at the moment across all organizations that we should use data and advanced analytics to drive value. So for me, the risk of using POC and small pieces to achieve value is about increasing the risk of entering what I call triple P, positive POC paralysis, because over the years, we've seen multiple organizations investing year on year into AI, and yet they failed to drive value. And I think there are multiple reasons. First of all, 3 years down the line, they're still building POCs and failing to scale. It's just too difficult. The solutions are not very sustainable because you start creating so many little pockets of success around your organization that some of them are not even productionized anymore, but they are used for decision making. So your single source of truth, your integration with data foundation, your ability to maintain it and sustain it, it just becomes more and more difficult with time. So I think the buzz is there in the beginning, but over time, that's what fails our data strategies.
That's really, really interesting, isn't it? And I wonder actually whether you are essentially arguing about the same point, because I think there's ways, there's kind of traps you can fall into, but at the same time, I mean, so coming back to you just quickly, Viktorija, are you arguing, and I'm being a bit cheeky here by being a bit maybe too provocative, are you arguing that kind of lean startup or agile kind of approach of, you know, fail fast, just build something, get it out there, show some value, and then go on and do something more? Are you saying that that's really not how we should approach things?
When it comes to turning into data-enabled organization, I think it's not the best way forward, because becoming data-enabled is a change. You have to have commitment and investment. And I think POC will only technically answer whether you can or cannot. And if you have commitment and investment, every time your team says, oh, we can't do something because of X, Y, Z, having those two factors will turn it into a positive can. So I think in software development, right, agile way is the way forward. It's been proven to be the best way to approach it. But we started to apply this concept into something that is a change management process. And I think that's where that approach tends to fail a lot of organizations. It's just not sustainable long term.
I've got a lot of things I would like to say, but I want to feature you. You're the stars of the show. So Brendan, I want to come back to you. What's your view on that?
It's interesting because that was my initial reaction. I must admit that the first time that Viktorija and I talked about this is I was adamant that Viktorija was wrong. And the more I've thought about it, there's definitely validity in doing it. I think it's definitely reliant on the type of organization. So if I think about kind of where I am at the moment, Pantheon operates predominantly in the private equity space. There's a lot that we could do with data to make more informed decision making. But the challenge is, how do I bring an organization on board or on the journey which has been quite successful without using the data to its fullest extent? So actually going through a lot of these POCs, the argument could be, well, we're doing all right as it sits. So whilst I can't disagree with what you're saying, because I think going after those bigger, more hairy, audacious goals is quite exciting and an option. To make it real for people who maybe are more ensconced in a business or been with a business a bit longer, may not necessarily see it all. I think the answer is trying to give that smallest nugget that gets somebody to go, ha. And I think if you can get that enough times, then you do need to sort of pull in political capital to say, this is what I want to do. But it's interesting because I think there's definitely an argument of POCs just help prove whether something can be done, whether it's the right thing. I mean, that is a whole different question.
So is the answer, just trying to be the kind of peacemaker here, is the answer that actually maybe we need to do both? I mean, what I'm thinking is that in a kind of an exploratory kind of mode, where maybe you've got an organization that doesn't really know what's possible, doesn't necessarily have a sense of how to make it real. They can't really conceptualize what can be done. Maybe the approach there is to kind of take the early steps through the foothills, if you like, on the way to the journey up the mountain. Through the foothills, we do some exploratory work with this kind of more bite-sized projects. But then when we do identify that there is an actual change we can make, a transformational change, then we switch and we take the trainers off and put on the proper mountain climbing gear and actually get into action. Is it as simple as that, or maybe there's even more complexity that I'm not seeing yet? And anyone got any thoughts on that?
I think it really boils down to two factors from my perspective. Is I think data teams, something that changed over years. Data teams used to be seen as someone very introverted behind the screen. But in the last, I would say 3 to 5 years, data teams became so passionate and enthusiastic about driving that change and bringing business on this journey that we forgot asking the business, do you really want to be data enabled? Or do you just want to have, quick wins around, quick and dirty solutions around because data is not essential? So I think sometimes we forget that not every business wants to be data enabled at this point in time. And it's absolutely fine then to, as you said, operate in that POC environment, or really just to make sure that everyone is on alignment, that at this point in time, we see no value from the executive level to be data enabled. And I think it's absolutely fine. So as you said, I think hybrid approach could work, but it comes down whether the business sees data as essential at that point in time in the organization, or is it nice to have? Because if it's nice to have, then we have a team that are very excited to become data driven and enabled, and they just work in a silo, being completely detached from the overall organizational strategy.
I think you're right, Neil, and I think you're also right as well, Viktorija. My take on it, though, would be every business is a data-driven organization. I've had relatively animated conversations in the past. It's what CFOs and finance functions have been doing since the dawn of time for businesses. So there's definitely an argument of saying we are data-driven in some way, shape, or form. I think that the argument about saying that the foundational part before we start, we put the walking boots on and really make progress. I think that comes down to Viktorija's point earlier around sort of executive buy-in. I think that there's a lot of recurring themes where executives would like the idea of doing data. Actually, when the rubber hits the road, will they stand behind a multi-year or a slightly more complex program or project to bring it to life? This is where I think sort of buy-in can fade relatively quickly, especially if it's not part of a core driver or aligned to the overall business strategy. So yes, I think there is a danger of not getting out of POCs, but really, the phrase that comes to mind is one I use quite regularly, which is, data drives the world, but people bring it to life. So, you've got to get the right people in the right place doing the right thing for the data to bring the value that a business needs. And we've all seen executives think and say, I think we should do this, and this is what we should do. Is there anything that supports or disproves that? And then that will help kind of align what we should go after. But I think it would be dangerous not to do the POC stage, because then you're just going off a bit of a wing and a prayer and say, I think this is the direction we should go. But I wouldn't say it's an easy one necessarily to answer.
Yeah. Okay. So I see what you're saying there, Brendan. Viktorija, anything else you want to add or come back to on this point?
I think Brendan made brilliant points, and maybe, the answer is not going one way or another. It's really about knowing which way is right for your organization at that point in time, and making sure that you don't get stuck in a vicious circle of POC. But even if that is the right thing to do, then we might just let it be.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so maybe, and this has just come to me, so it could be complete nonsense. But maybe we need to be business driven before we can be data driven. How about that?
Sounds sensible. I guess there's only one way to find out, isn't there? And if it works, Neil, you can take the credit. If it doesn't, blame somebody else.
Trademark it. All right, listen, well, thank you so much, Viktorija and Brendan, for joining us. Real pleasure. And with any luck, we'll be able to have more conversations like this. I've found it really, really interesting. I know there's only so much that we can say on this video, and there's so much we could get into. So hopefully we'll get a chance to come back and talk some more. So thank you for the moment, at least, Viktorija and Brendan, for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Neil. It was really a pleasure. And thank you, Brendan.
No, thank you, Neil. Thank you, Viktorija. It was great.
All right, brilliant. Well, happy Friday to both of you. I hope you have a great weekend. And to you, thank you very much for watching. Please let me know what you think. If you enjoyed this or any of the other videos that I've done, please do the usual things, like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. And we will see you again very soon.